Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining in the webinar this afternoon. I'm Tyler Williams. I'm an extension educator with the University of Nebraska located in Lincoln. I'm hosting this webinar on behalf of the NC3 team, which is the North Central Climate Collaborative. It's an initiative of the North Central Region Water Network. And I'm happy to introduce Melissa Widhalm from Purdue University, who's delivering this month's webinar. She'll share a little bit about the Indiana Climate Assessment, as well as how that might be useful going forward. Melissa is the operations manager for the Purdue Climate Change Research Center and is a coordinator for the Indiana Climate Change Impacts Assessment. So thanks to Melissa for being here today. A couple things before I kick it over to her. I want to mention that I'll put up a 2-question poll here at the beginning. Just a quick, simple answer where you're from, what you do type question, and then also do a 2-question poll at the end. So you can look for that to pop up. I'll leave it up for about 5 to 7 minutes or so, and then I'll pull it back down. Also, if you have a question along the way, go ahead and type that into the chat box or the Q&A. I'll try to keep an eye on that, and if it looks like a question that needs to be addressed right away, I'll go ahead and tell Melissa we've got a question and address that then. If not, if it looks like it's a general question, we'll address those at the end. So again, you can type that in anytime you'd like, or we'll take questions at the end. So we'll try to leave plenty of time to answer questions and get any feedback or anything else that you might want to visit about. So with that, I think that's all that I have for the beginning. Melissa, are you on and able to hear me?
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me?
All right. Yeah. No, you sound good. I'll kick it over to you, and I'll pull up the polling question. So again, just thanks for being here, and appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Tyler, and really thank you to the whole North Central Climate Collaborative for inviting me to share with everyone Indiana's experience with starting the conversation at home. You'll notice that I don't have my webcam turned on. So if you're somebody who's maybe wanting to put a face with the voice, there's me, that's me, Melissa. I'm joining you today from Purdue University, located in West Lafayette, Indiana. So as operations manager with the Purdue Climate Change Research Center and as coordinator for the Indiana Climate Change Impacts Assessment, you can imagine that I spend a lot of my time thinking about the local impacts of climate on our families and on our communities and on our way of life here in Indiana. But that's not the case among the majority of my fellow Hoosiers. Around here, and it's probably the case where many of you live as well, when people hear the phrase climate change or global warming, they picture in their minds something like this. Some poor polar bear floating away on a melting bit of ice at the far end of the earth, something far, far away. Or they think of something like this, maybe a distant point far in the future, not here and now. And so the images that have been shown to us for years and the language that we use, it's really made it difficult for people to see that climate change is an urgent and local issue. So as a result of this, just about 52% of Hoosier adults say that they're worried about climate change. And this data all come from the Yale Climate Opinions Maps. You can get this aggregated by state or county, congressional district for the whole US. So only 52% of Hoosiers are saying they're worried about climate change. And just 35% thinks that climate change is going to harm them personally. Even fewer report that they talk about climate change at least occasionally. So while I spend every day thinking about climate change in Indiana, it's just not something that we're prioritizing here in Indiana yet. That's the optimist in me. Now, putting my optimism aside for just a moment, with concern so low and levels of dialogue so low, it sometimes makes you ask, well, should Hoosiers or anybody really even be concerned about climate change or talking about it? Is that really remarkable that it's so low? Spoiler alert, when you look at the data The answer is a resounding yes. Hoosiers, and really everyone here in the Midwest, we really contribute to the root cause of climate change, so the human emissions of heat-trapping gases, and we're already seeing the impacts from the changes that we've detected over the last century. So in terms of per capita energy use, Indiana actually ranks the 9th highest in the US. We don't have any state-level climate policy. We don't have any immediate plans for emissions reductions. At times, we've seemed to work against moving towards renewable energy, not towards it. And we've also, at times, worked against federal climate regulations. We have a number of elected officials who are pretty vocal in their skepticism about climate science. And all of these things keep climate change a low priority among Hoosiers. And it does nothing to break these misperceptions about our local risks of climate change impacts. But the data, the actual real observations that we have, this shows a different story. This shows that we are seeing changing weather patterns and that we're experiencing the impacts from those changes. So for instance, we know from our historical data that our temperature has already warmed over 1 degree Fahrenheit here in our state over the last century. And as a result of that 1 degree of warming, our growing season has lengthened 2 to 3 weeks in the last 50 years. And we see far fewer extremely cold days than we used to see. And our overnight temperatures are rapidly increasing. I know these are similar to the trends that we see all across the Midwest. And our rainfall today is over 5 inches higher annually than it was a century ago. And we're not just seeing more total rain, but the nature of storms have shifted. Our heaviest events are getting larger. So when you look at Indiana weather stations, they're seeing an increase in the number of 2-inch rainfall events and 3-inch rainfall events. These are actual observations that we know have happened. And if total rainfall is increasing and heavy downpours is increasing, it's not surprising to know that we're observing higher stream flows pretty much every month of the year through the majority of sites throughout the state. Our peak annual flows on these rivers are increasing, so we're seeing more volume in those highest flow events. Flooding is on the rise. There was a study that came out that shows the magnitude of flooding in Indiana has increased 6 to 9% per decade since the 1920s. So we have multiple lines of evidence that show our climate is changing. And our scientists are telling us that we should expect climate change to continue and intensify. So yes, this is something that Hoosiers need to be hearing about and thinking about and prioritizing as they're planning for our future communities and our future agriculture and all of those things that are so closely connected to our weather and climate. They need to be asking the question, what does climate change mean for Indiana? As conditions change globally, what does that mean here locally? What impacts do we need to be planning for? So these are all the types of questions that our faculty at the Purdue Climate Change Research Center are looking into. So the PCCRC, as it's called, we're a faculty-led center at Purdue, and we're really trying to understand both the impacts of climate change and to develop novel solutions to the problem. So helping people understand how to reduce their emissions and how to prepare for these impacts we know are already happening. So we were established back in 2004, so we've been around a little while. We have about 90 faculty affiliates across our campus on a broad range of subject areas. And in keeping in line with Purdue's land-grant university mission, our faculty are engaged not just in teaching and research, but also in outreach. So we've really strived to be a trusted source of science-based information for decision makers here in our own state and beyond our borders. Now, it's not the first time that faculty at the Purdue Climate Change Research Center has helped answer this question of what does climate change mean for Indiana. Back in 2008, one of our U.S. senators, you see him here pictured on the screen, Senator Lugar, he reached out to our center. He knew he was preparing to vote on a cap-and-trade bill. And so he reached out to us and he said, I need to know about climate change and how it affects my state. Oh, and I need it in about 3 weeks or so. So we very quickly were able to pull from our broad range of expertise across campus, and we quickly put together this report you see here on the screen, the impacts of climate change for the state of Indiana. So this was put out about a decade ago, and in that time, between now and then, there's really been a tremendous number of new studies that have come out, new assessments that have come out nationally and regionally, but we really haven't done anything yet to update our state level assessment. And so as the years passed, we had also were receiving a growing number of requests from the public and from professionals in our state asking if there were more updated state and local information about climate change. And so we're seeing this interest in climate change gaining traction in our state. We have quite a few communities now who have come together and organizations to start taking local action and to try to elevate the conversation about climate change in our state, despite the total lack of interest when it comes from the state level. So we have all of these moving parts. We have a growing level of interest here in our state in this decades-old report. So when Jeff Dukes took over as the Purdue Climate Change Research Center director a few years ago, he decided now is the time to update this assessment. We're going to do this. And so from there, the Indiana Climate Change Impacts Assessment was born, IN CCIA. But this time, we wanted to take a different approach. We didn't just want it to be a standalone document here from Purdue. We wanted it to be more comprehensive, and we wanted it to involve a much broader group of experts from across the state. We have a lot of people working in this space at Purdue and outside of Purdue as well that we wanted to take advantage of. So in addition to creating a new report, we wanted it to be created with usable information. We wanted to build a network of stakeholders and of experts who were interested in climate change and try to help link them together. And really, we wanted to increase dialogue about climate change among Hoosiers to help it become a priority. Think back a few slides ago to how low those numbers were. People just aren't talking about it. They're not thinking about it. It's not part of the planning process. So can we help influence that through the climate change impacts assessment? Can we get more people thinking and acting on climate change? So there are a few things about our assessment that we think are pretty unique when you compare them to other state level assessments. I think the biggest one that usually surprises people the most is that there's no mandate to conduct this assessment, and there's actually no funding to conduct this assessment. This has essentially been a completely bottom-up effort overseen by the Purdue Climate Change Research Center. We have about 100 experts throughout Indiana who work in various areas of climate change research that we've recruited to provide in-kind technical contributions to the assessment. And so these experts are participating in working groups that are tasked with producing a sector-based technical report. And then staff at the Purdue Climate Change Research Center translates these technical reports into non-technical summaries. And so these summaries are then released to the public as part of the climate assessment. So we have both these technical reports and public reports that make up our assessment. Now, we didn't want to create this assessment in a vacuum, and so the non-technical reports were an essential component of this process because we put a high emphasis on stakeholder needs and stakeholder engagement right from the very beginning of this process. So we wanted to create information that could actually be used and understood by non-scientists. And so this is an important part. So let's unpack this here just for a little bit. So for the purposes of the Indiana assessment, we broadly define stakeholders as anyone who's interested in or likely affected by the information in the impact assessment reports. And so at the start of this assessment, the decision was made to prioritize engagement of stakeholders for several reasons. We know that with a topic like climate change, it was going to be essential for us to build trust between the scientists and the public, and we knew it was essential to have transparency in this process. We believed that if we were able to engage our stakeholders early and often throughout the process, that would help us increase buy-in from them, and it would help us raise awareness about the work we're doing and help us better disseminate the work we're doing. And most importantly, by engaging with the stakeholders, it helped us learn from them. So it helped us understand the topics and the issues that they were interested in knowing about. So one of the very first things we did at the very beginning of this process, before we even had our technical working groups developed, we went out and we gathered formal and informal feedback from a pretty broad range of professionals and organizations in the state. And that really helped us identify the topic areas that people wanted to see when they opened up those technical reports. And so that's what informed the development of our working groups. And this stakeholder feedback, it also was really useful in helping us devise our outreach strategy and for jumpstarting our networking. Now, once the assessment reports were underway, we really wanted to keep people actively engaged. And so one strategy that we employed was to recruit about 40 stakeholder reviewers to provide input as the reports were being generated, but before they were finalized. So that was also something helpful to keep people involved. We have a number of other strategies to inform and engage people, and I'll talk about more of those dissemination strategies here in just a moment. So the topics around which our working groups formed are shown here on the screen. I won't read them to you. You can take a look at them. Each group was given, they were provided the stakeholder feedback that we received, and they were tasked with developing that technical report. And so that technical report was sort of a combination of, what the stakeholders wanted to hear about, what the available science was that they had to pull from, and who the experts were within that working group, what kind of expertise we had around the table. And once those technical reports were available, then the Purdue Climate Change Research Center translated those into the non-technical summaries, and we released them to the public. So we're releasing these reports one by one. That's another thing that's unique about our assessment. A lot of times you'll have a large document that comes out with many chapters all at once. We're releasing these on a rolling basis. And so since March of this year, 2018, that's when we started putting out the reports. So far we've released 6. I've highlighted them here to show which 6 we've completed. So you can see this is all since March of 2018. We've been pretty busy. We are planning to have another report come out next month in November, and then the remaining reports will be out in 2019. And I don't show it here, but we're also working on an overall summary report as well that'll happen after the other reports come available. And all of these, I'm not going to talk about the reports, the content of the reports here today. We'll save that for another webinar. But if you're interested in seeing what the results are saying from these reports, you can see all of that on indianaclimate.org. And if you go to the site, you'll see that you can read the reports both online or as a downloadable PDF. We really try to include a lot of easy-to-read graphics. So I have an example up there on the right of the projections of our change in spring drainage, rather than showing some of the more complicated graphics that are in the technical report. We tried to trim it down to something a little bit more manageable and meaningful for a non-technical audience. And so we try to include these easy-to-read graphics and really keep those technical details to a minimum, since they are aiming at a non-technical audience, but also, you know, linking people back to the technical reports as needed. So if they are really interested in digging into the details, we try to give them access to that as well. So as I briefly mentioned earlier, we have a variety of approaches that we use to keep our stakeholders informed, to communicate with them and engage with them throughout this whole process, before, during, and after the development of these reports. We have a monthly newsletter, which has become pretty popular. Again, all of the archives for that are on our website, and you can sign up for it if you're interested. It's once a month by email. We have, we're pretty active on social media. We do quite a few speaking events with communities and various organizations. We also use community briefings in our engagement strategy, and these are held in conjunction with the release of our individual reports. And so these are free hour-long events for the public and the media. We hold them at different locations around the state, and that really helps us hit different media markets and engage a variety of local communities and people. So I'm going to show you here on the map, here are the different locations so far that we've been around the state. And so we're not always going and dipping back into that same group over and over again. We're trying to get out throughout the state as we do these releases. Now, we found these events to be extremely helpful in helping us attract media coverage and to keeping the conversation going about the impacts assessment. That was another reason for releasing these on a rolling basis, was really to be able to keep this at a steady boil instead of just a one-time shot. You know, really try to give people multiple times to get exposed to the information, to see what's happening in more digestible chunks as opposed to being overwhelmed all at once. So for each release, we will identify and personally invite any of the local stakeholders, trying to get them to attend the event, and then we also do post-event follow-ups. And so we really use this community briefing event itself to help us generate multiple contacts with our stakeholders. We develop pre and post event media releases, and we also work directly with local media to try to motivate their interests in covering the topic and the event, and also the topics in the reports. We create video recaps after the event. So if you weren't able to attend, but you wanted to get the 3-minute rundown, and we use that quite a bit on social media and also with the press to try to get, give them something packaged that they can use to help us disseminate this further. And we do a multi-week intensive social media campaign with each release that helps us publicize the event and also the key findings from the reports. So between developing the reports and getting the word out about it, it keeps me pretty busy most days. So we set out 3 years ago with these lofty goals of delivering credible, comprehensive climate impact reports to an arguably uninterested public with no funding. And we wanted to build a network of people interested in climate change, and we wanted to elevate the conversation about climate change here in our state. And so while our assessment isn't complete yet, I think it's never too early to start asking if we're being successful at this. Are we actually meeting our goals? Based on the few indicators that we've been tracking, I do think that we're heading in the right direction. And so one way we look at this is with our media coverage. To date, we've tracked about 280 climate assessment media placements, and that's both locally and nationally. This includes online and print coverage, and we've even managed the front page coverage for a few of the major newspapers here in our state, so that was exciting. We've been hearing directly from some of the communities and organizations who've been putting the climate assessment to use in their planning and in their decision making. So that's really encouraging when you get these stories back to show you what people are doing with the data you're providing. And in our newsletter, if you sign up, you'll see that I've shamelessly started just asking people to share with us their stories, share with us how they're using this, so we can try to get a feel for what's where our information is headed. Since this time last year, we've done about 50 community and professional events around the state. Some of these were before the assessment came out to, explain what we're doing and why we're doing it and to get some feedback. And since March, this has really been our way of helping get the reports out to professionals and community members and organizations who've been interested in this information. And we already have many more scheduled for the upcoming months. Too many to keep up with for some months. And so really we can see that interest in the topic continuing to grow over time. And then of course, we're tracking things like our web traffic and our social media analytics and report downloads and such. And we can watch how that ebbs and flows with the different events that we do and monitor that over time. Okay, so what's next for the climate assessment? Well, we still have 4 more public reports that are under development, and so that's going to keep us busy into the second half of next year, I'm sure. In the meantime, we're going to continue with all of our current communication efforts, including our newsletter and holding public events and our social media presence. More recently, we started working on a strategy to develop training programs and other resources that'll help make the climate assessment information more useful in the classroom and help Purdue Extension in their climate communications efforts. We have several research projects that are underway at Purdue and at partner institutions to help fill the gaps in some of those research gaps that we've identified. That was obviously going to happen as you start asking questions about climate change and impacts. You end up with more questions than you can answer. And so we have a lot of people working on those as well. And so as that's happening, it gets us thinking about how we want to work towards some kind of sustained assessment approach so that we can continue releasing new information about climate change impacts as it becomes available. And this doesn't always mean full-length reports. So one option that we're looking into right now is developing a mini series where we can really dive into one aspect of the topic that's maybe not covered in any of the other assessment reports. So I'll give you one example. We get a lot of questions about grape production and climate change. Well, we didn't include anything about grape production in our agriculture report, but we have some things that we know that we can talk about. And so maybe, we can start a one-page series, a summary fact sheet on specific topics in a user-friendly way to help keep that information flowing until we do our next set of formal reports. And finally, we're always working on new ways to assess our reach and to assess any shifts in perceptions that might be able to be attributed to the climate assessment. We want people, when they hear that phrase climate change, we want to know if they're thinking about the polar bear or if instead they're picturing their fellow Hoosiers and their local communities and the social and physical structures here in our state and the very things that make us Hoosiers, which, yes, even includes our potholes, unfortunately. So our story continues. We're not done with the assessment yet. So I hope that you're going to try to stay informed and stay connected with us. There's a variety of ways to do so. The best, most efficient way is to check out our website at indianaclimate.org. Find us on social media, or you know, you can always get in touch with myself or our director, Jeff Dukes, with any further questions you have. All right, so I think that wraps it up. Tyler, I don't know if there were any questions that had come in, but I'm happy to answer them if we have time.
Sure. Thanks, Melissa. I'm going to just pull up the second poll real quick. Put that on there so people can do that before they bounce off. One question that I got, but you'd answered it earlier, was how this process was funded, and you mentioned that it's not necessarily funded, but you play a pretty critical role to doing this. Many states probably don't have someone such as yourself to be able to do this coordinator type role. My question for this is, I think a lot of people will probably be thinking about doing this for their state with the new National Climate Assessment coming out in December. Do you have any tips on maybe who or how people could identify who might take a central role in developing that, or if you have any ideas on maybe the best process to get something like that started?
Sure. So, I mean, there's quite a few states who have done state-level assessments. Some of them will take a more simplified approach of just focusing in on what's available from the National Climate Assessment. Others will take a much more in-depth approach at doing, you know, new modeling and analysis for their specific state, and everything in between. And it's really just a matter of resources and who you have available. And so I think there's some natural organizations that I think would be really useful in this role. Certainly, if you have an active and engaged state climate office, or if there's some active and engaged extension specialists in your state who focus on climate and climate change, they would, in my opinion, be very useful at coordinating something like this. Here at Purdue, we were lucky to have the Purdue Climate Change Research Center, and when our director took over, he decided that it was worth the center's time to dedicate a portion of a position to coordinating this effort. And so while I say there's no funding to do it, right, we didn't receive any money to hand off to all of our experts, there was at least that base of a portion of a position to coordinate. And so if, you know, I think you definitely need to have somebody who is identified as overseeing it, somebody who can scale it appropriately. You don't want to bite off more than you can chew. And so, you know, it takes time to coordinate that. It's also very helpful when you can do like we've done in Indiana, where we leverage the work that's already being done. I mean, we were able to recruit 100 people across the state to contribute to this because it was already in line with things they were doing. And so we had to figure out what was in it for them, right? They don't want to just do this for nothing. So we had to make sure that their participation was beneficial, whether it's through helping them get out published papers, helping them get media placements, helping them do different things that, whatever it is that's important metrics for them to show to, you know, wherever they're at in their professional career. So, you know, there's a lot to juggle there, but I think just really having that key organization who's willing to take over that oversight responsibility and give it the attention it deserves is really helpful in getting this off the ground.
Okay, thanks. Another question, in what ways would a mandate from the state help or hinder the assessment process?
Well, you're right, it could help or hinder. I know there have been some states where they had a mandate from their state and that came with funding. There's a state out in the Northwest, I think it was Washington, I could be wrong. They had something like $1 million to fund their state level assessment. And so that can really help because there are some limitations you have when you don't have the resources to run certain analyses that you want, or to fund a student or a postdoc or whatever it might be to help with some of, you know, filling those gaps. And so you're sort of at the mercy of the existing literature and whatever ongoing projects are happening if you don't have funding to do new work. So that could certainly be helpful if there was a mandate that came with funding. If there was a mandate that didn't come with funding, I'm not sure that would, I guess that could help motivate participation, just knowing that it's something that could help inform policy. It could be something that helps inform your state's budget. And so there are benefits to it being recognized as valuable to your state through a mandate. Certainly, if the mandate dictates what should or shouldn't be in the report, that could really be a challenge. And I know there's other states that have had that experience where, you know, the mandate maybe put more restrictions on the report than was desired and what they could talk about and how they could talk about it. So yeah, it could certainly help or harm. And, you know, our experiences was just doing it from the bottom up. And so I guess we had free reign to do with it what we wanted, but that doesn't, in the end, our own influence will determine whether or not it's picked up and used, right? There's not sort of this ready audience at the state level. But for us, you know, we prioritize giving this information to professionals, decision makers, elected officials more at the local level. So we're not necessarily looking at the state as our audience. And so, you know, that's just what we made of it.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, what kind of feedback have you gotten on your outreach to the public? Have some people given you angry feedback or challenges?
You know, we've had a lot of positive feedback. A lot of times what happens with how we've been doing some of these events, we get invited to attend by an organization that has some interest in their membership hearing about climate change. And then somebody from there is part of another group and part of another group. And so it's sort of this word of mouth. And so we've found ourselves connecting with people more organically. So we're not necessarily seeking them out as much as they're seeking us out. And so I think that helps in terms of the conversations that have been going, because you're really engaging with people who are genuinely interested instead of somebody who's maybe hostile and feeling like it's getting jammed down their throat. We haven't done too much just general public outreach. This has really been more at that professional decision-making level, interested public through people who are a part of organizations that have some interest in climate change. You know, we'll get some feedback on social media or comments in news reports that are, you know, your anonymous troll that can sometimes just try to fuel conspiracy theories, but it's, you know, really overwhelmingly not that kind of a response that we get. I think a lot of people here, they're just seeing the realities, right? We get a lot of flooding here, a lot of flooding, and that's been their experience. And it's been their experience enough in recent years that they just want to know what's going on and what they can do to better prepare for it. So I really see a lot of people that we interact with as, you know, not being hostile and just wanting to have a safe community, have healthy families, and have a competitive economy here in our state. So I think we're moving in a good direction right now with the conversation in our state.
Okay, thanks. That's the last question that I see. I don't see anything else jumping in here, so I do appreciate you taking time to share with us. People have your contact information there. They can find you if they think of something after this. We'll post a recording of this webinar on the northcentralclimate.org website, so you can always refer back to that if you wanted to see anything again. So again, thanks, Melissa, for joining in today and giving us this webinar, and everyone else for taking an hour out of your afternoon or lunchtime. So enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll be back in a couple months. You can look forward to an email on the exact date and topic of that one. So thanks, and then have a good day.